Thank you for joining us for Tennessee Turf Tuesdays today. I am Becky Bowling. I am your host today. Dr. Brosnan is out of pocket for the day. And just as a couple of housekeeping items before we get started today, when you registered for this event today, you provided us with everything that we need to ensure that we can get you your pesticide points. So almost every time we do one of these, we get questions about this in real time as it relates to what do I need to provide. When you registered, you gave us everything that we needed. And so today we are very excited to have my very good friend, Dr. Natalie Bumgarner, with us. Um, and so we are going to talk all things horticulture, extension, the relationship between consumer and commercial horticulture. So, Dr. Bumgarner, let's start by will you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm glad to be here today. Looking forward to a fun visit. So I'm Natalie Bumgarner, and I'm in the plant sciences department. So normally Becky and I are hearing each other talk through the wall on these meetings, but I'm actually in Middle Tennessee today, and I work in the area of consumer horticulture with a little bit of commercial on the side, which we'll probably talk about. But my main area is doing applied research and educational resources to serve who are in fact your consumers. So the people that buy plants, the people that buy the services, and actually, so my background is in commercial vegetable production, but I work all across the landscape, ornamental, fruit, vegetable, flower, whole deal.
Awesome. Okay, so this gets us to a good starting point for our first topic, which is you've already used these terms right out of the gate, consumer versus commercial. You provided kind of a loose definition there of consumer horticulture, but these are audiences that Extension, so you and I both work for Extension, we serve both consumer and commercial audiences. So can you give us a little bit more clarity from your view on what do those two terms mean and what does it look like when we serve them in Extension?
Yeah. So I think that there's kind of the traditional baseline definition, and then there's the modernizing, emerging definition. So traditionally, extension has served the producer audiences, people who are growing plants, animals, products for sale. So that's the commercial audience. And we have, in some ways, passively serve the consumer audience. So those are just the walk-ins, right? Those are, just the individual folks that, have a tomato problem or, have an insect or a disease or a plant question. But of course, as we think about how, this is changing, the relative percentages of those two audiences have shifted dramatically over the 100, and 10 plus years that extension has been around. So, my job, consumer horticulture specialist, is something that we hadn't had, before a dozen years or so ago, because we want to be more intentional about serving what I refer to as my stakeholder audience is the 98%, right? So we have about 2% that are involved in some kind of agricultural production. You may well be a part of those, but the people that you work with are actually the 98%. So that's kind of what my general definitions are. Do you agree with that? What do you think?
I do. I think you and I have had a lot of conversations about how, particularly when we talk about the green industry, sometimes those lines start to get a little bit blurry. And we've also kind of played with some different terms, right? Because we have a whole group of stakeholders that work for school districts, work for municipalities that may not explicitly identify as a commercial audience. They may not explicitly identify as a consumer audience. They're somewhere in the middle. I think one of the terms we've passed around for this is public serving professionals, right? So recognizing this is kind of a spectrum, especially when we're dealing with the green industry, with horticulture, turfgrass. And I think one of the things that you and I have been discussing over the past couple of years is, where are there opportunities to create greater synergy between all of these different groups? Where do we see positive connections? Where do we see opportunities for improvement? I know I have some thoughts on that. Um, but what are kind of some of your initial thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think that we have the opportunity to engage, kind of with those two sections of the V, so to speak. If we have a V, then like we as Extension, we engage with commercial audiences, we engage with consumers. But I think that what we can do better is connect those audiences with each other, whether it be products, whether it be services, when we think about this whole area. And you also mentioned kind of our municipalities, the the public serving folks who may not be in fact receiving monetary. This is just a part of their job, whether they work for the city, or a county, or something like that. So to me, it's really about connecting those groups in a way that is still very much synergistic with the communication that is coming from universities, from extension. And when I think about that, I think many times it may be related to kind of, I guess I'm getting to the extension, question, I guess maybe already. But I think that that may be related to kind of our more rural history, in that, extension serves people in the, counties and communities in which they live. So we're ready to serve these people, and we're ready to serve these people, but we may not have really thought about or created a system that when we get to big, when the population gets too big to engage with these two people individually, there could be great benefit in helping them connect with each other.
Yeah, I think it brings up this really good question of efficiency and how we approach things. So there's a lot we can kind of dig into here. But I think, when we talk about the shift that you mentioned as it relates to, we have this growing percentage of consumers, a lot of folks that, particularly during COVID, became more interested in gardening, became more interested in, this is the Turfgrass podcast. We had a lot of folks that were like, I'm going to build a golf green in my backyard. I think what that led to is, a lot of opportunity for people to look for information and maybe I don't want to say the wrong places, but a lot of opportunity for confusion about where they should go for information. A lot of opportunity for confusion around who are the experts, who are the, where can they go for objective information. I also think you're just talking about such a diffuse audience that it is really hard to communicate in a clean and organized way with that audience. So to kind of take what you just said and think about, a lot of us have this model of extension in our mind that comes from a more traditional rural mindset where I can go as a county agent. It makes sense for me to go out onto a property with a landowner that manages 1,000 acres of property in my county and spend half a day with that landowner. It doesn't make sense if I am a county agent. We have some of these agents on this call. If I'm a county agent in Hamilton County in Chattanooga or Davidson County in Nashville, for me to go to every individual homeowner in my county and spend half a day with them, that's not a great use of my time and resources. So it challenges us to rethink, how do we create efficiency with our time while still retaining our status as objective experts that are sharing science-based information. How do we do that effectively and efficiently such that we have an impact? And I think the only way that you do that is to try to get creative in how you build that connection between consumer and commercial, because commercial is where a lot of that impact is happening. As well as with some of these public serving professionals, a lot of opportunities to work with municipalities, work with schools. Like thinking about, if I'm a county extension agent, who can I spend time with for half a day that is not going to just shift one person's behavior, but has the potential to shift 100 people's behavior, 1,000 people's behavior. So this has kind of been the question that I think we've been kicking around. And we've got a lot of really good agents in the state, young, energetic, smart agents in these very urban counties that are like ready to help us figure this out. But it's a big question.
Yeah, it's a big question, and it's one that horticulture, whether we're growing flowering plants, whether we're growing vegetables, whether we're growing turf grass, is the tip of the spear because, we're going to hit this, we have hit this number and this need. Earlier, you mentioned the pandemic, the how many millions of, people started gardening. And we also, of course, hit that at a time when people are accessing short form content. And the other thing that is, of course, happening behind the scenes, I'm smiling because there's some folks on here that know that I'm not particularly good at this. We have to shorten our content and retain the efficacy and the value of that while still being, approachable and actually digestible.
Yep.
So it's not just the methods, it's also, the materials themselves.
Yep. So I think when this comes up for me, I'll give some examples for our audience, right? Like we get a lot of folks that get exposure to plant lists. We have a lot of folks, Natalie, you and I have made some trips recently to some native plant nurseries across the state, for agent and service trainings. You recognize that there's a hunger, a desire for certain plants, and very often there may be a disconnect between that and what is actually available. There may be confusion about how we define native. There may be confusion about what's appropriate within a state. You just don't know where folks are getting information. So, like, that's a disconnect. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah. Well, and it's a disconnect, and I think that also it some of that comes from your very good place, wanting to make decisions that are sound from an ecological point of view, but operating from maybe not a deep enough information base to be able to make the best decisions. We've had some really interesting discussions with some producers, more on, say, the woody flowering plant side from a nursery perspective, about the incoming customer base that is very passionate about what they want to buy, but maybe isn't truly making decisions based on functionality, right? It's just buzzword, right? It's just a TikTok customer who thinks that they have enough information to make that broad decision, but hasn't yet. So they were definitely saying, you know what, we'd love for y'all to continue to educate so that when folks come to us, they're asking maybe higher order questions about what does this plant do in this space, not just I want this because I, saw a meme or saw, something.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think in this world of 7-second snippets on everything, we are living in like a peak Dunning-Kruger effect where everybody has just enough information to be dangerous. And, this is a positive manifestation of that. I know, a lot of our turfgrass professionals are going to experience another version of that where people are not going to understand critical aspects of what they do for a living. They're going to have just enough information on glyphosate or just enough information on water use and not ask any questions beyond that. And as a result, turfgrass often gets vilified with a very incomplete data set, right? So, like the other place where I see a disconnect sometimes is in we've got a lot of green industry professionals that manage areas that are utilized by the public. This is a strength of what we do as an industry. We provide green spaces and recreational spaces for people to live their lives outdoors. And it's a powerful thing. And it creates a lot of opportunity for the public to interact with what we do for a living without maybe fully understanding it. So I think in addition to providing education that's going to help people make solid decisions in their landscape, help shift behaviors in terms of how they manage their own personal properties, there's also a challenge for extension specialists like you or I to create education that help the public understand what the green industry does, that help the public value it, that help the public, that kind of wash away misconceptions. That's been a huge part of my job in working with golf course superintendents and working with parks and rec facility managers is thinking through how do we communicate that these are research-based decisions that we're making. These are informed best management practices. What are the best ways to communicate that to a public that doesn't fully understand, right?
Yeah.
So that's another cool
Yeah.
challenge, I guess.
Yeah. Communicate with words or just communicate with really well done spaces. I mean, I've had the opportunity to travel with you to some some golf courses that are doing their landscapes in a way that absolutely will make people leave those facilities thinking, I want this. How can I achieve what is occurring here, in my personal landscape? And it can definitely be a picture is worth a thousand words in those commercial or in those public spaces. And it's exciting, but it's also something that we know has to be an intentional investment from municipalities because those things don't just happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I guess my last little example that I would just provide here, just to get people thinking about this a little bit, and then we'll kind of move on to what are some things. We'll talk a little bit about UT Hort. What are some things that we're doing to try to tackle some of these obstacles or some of these challenges? I'll say. So another example of where I see this show up on the turf grass side, and I'd be curious if you see anything similar, maybe on the landscape side or in some of these horticulture spaces. But we've got a lot of professionals in this industry that have half control over the environments that they're working in, right? So if I'm a commercial landscape operator, my responsibility may end at making chemical applications, or it may end at mowing. I may or may not have control over the mowing. I may or may not have control over how that lawn is irrigated, or all of these other critical practices that either set up my work for success or undermine it. And I don't want to say doom it to failure, but if we have homeowners that are still or end users that are still responsible for some of these practices and don't understand how to do them well, it can really have an impact of this on the success of our professionals. And so, I think that's another area that we're thinking about in extension is how do we help bridge that gap so that when these commercial landscape operators go out into a space, they're able to either be armed with resources or interacting with consumers or customers that have a little bit more working knowledge so that everything is more successful.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's an exciting space because, say it's a landscape services company, they're the ones that have a whole lot more personal interaction with my quote unquote consumer horticulture stakeholder, and to be able to engage with them to have a suite of resources that would not only educate that consumer, it would maybe save the county agent from going out to visit a landscape because the information has already been there. And it helps our service provider provide an even better product to increase the value of what they do. I mean, that's like a win in four different directions. And it could be accomplished by thinking about our relationships and kind of the informational arrows in a way that is out of the box a little bit.
Yeah. So we've kind of touched on already kind of the broader role of extension, but I think I want to dig in a little bit here, and I want to, you're somebody that I view as really historically like having two jobs that you've been able to be really intentional with how you manage your position to create a lot of efficiency, and you put a lot of thought into how you operate your program to address a lot of these things that we're talking about. So, can you tell us a little bit about UT Hort, and tell us a little bit about how that's structured, who's kind of engaged with that effort? Let's start there.
Yeah. Yeah. So UC Hort is essentially our statewide collaborative of the specialists, that are often, working on campus with our network of agents and area specialists across the state. Some of them, of course, who are hanging out with us today. And we're now more than 10 years into this activity. And, it's just the acknowledgement that, me with a statewide position, or say, if you're in Davidson County or if you're in Rutherford County, you have millions of people to serve too. And that we just need, to come together and have a central way of communicating, of hosting resources, and of building up our suite of content. And so, it started with writing publications. That's what we do, an extension, right? And we still do that as far as selection resources. But really what it has grown into is webinar series, is curriculum that is designed for delivery at the county level, whether that is done by the agent or whether it's done by a volunteer. We haven't talked about volunteers yet, but all of us on our horticulture team work with more than 3,000 of them across the state, which is also the way that we multiply our impact in those areas. And so we do have a website, right? The website really is just our central place to, put forward information about content as well as, as resources. And our goal is to provide information, but to connect that broad consumer audience with the real live human beings that are, their extension connection, as well as with you. I should say that also on our UT Hort, we have UT Hort Pros, which connects stakeholders with lawn and landscape service providers and with great professionals across the state. So it is still very much a work in progress, but it is our effort to cohesively connect, our commercial, our consumer, our various service providers across the state of Tennessee.
So I want to not take for granted our audience's knowledge of how extension works because I still regularly get called a county extension
our families
agent.
and friends are confused after decades of us talking about it. Yeah.
So let's do a little clarity here and talk about, kind of how extension is structured. So Tennessee has 95 counties. We have county offices in each of those 95 counties. In those counties, we have varying numbers of county extension agents, and those agents have variable expertise and responsibilities, right? Anything you would add to that? Okay.
Yeah.
And so we've got, I would say, particularly in and around some of our urban hubs, we've got some agents that have some added horticulture expertise. This is true as well. And we've got a lot of areas in Tennessee that are rapidly growing. We have a lot of urbanization, counties that have historically been rural that are becoming more urbanized. So we've got, a lot of county extension agents that have a passion for horticulture, have background training in horticulture. The number that kind of interacts with some of these UT Hort efforts fluctuates, right? But I would say, what would you say on average?
We're between 20 and 30. So, there's about 4 or 5 of those are specialists, and, in that 20-25 range are awesome agents in those county roles. And exactly as Becky was saying, we have a great reservoir of horticulture experience. A few folks in positions where horticulture is what they do high 90% of the time, right? And then we also have some professionals who came from a production background that is animal or is more agronomic, and found, of course, in their changing counties and cities that, fruits and vegetables and turfgrass and landscape plants were what their questions were about, and in many ways have made themselves into awesome horticulture experts themselves. So that's across, that whole range.
Yeah. In other words, we've pulled them to the dark side.
Right.
Let's take them.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We love to convert the animal scientists.
So that's our agents, and so they are county focused. We do have some agents that just by nature of their expertise will operate in other counties a little bit, or they'll be invited to speak in other counties. We have at least 3 commercial horticulture agents that I'm aware of in the state of Tennessee, one in each region that specialize with working with a more commercial audience. And so then in addition to that, we have specialists like Natalie and myself, who are subject matter experts for the state at large. So while the agents have to be experts in 1,000 different things within their county, I think of a Haley Treadway there in Hamilton County who, on any given week, she's doing pig stuff, she's doing cow stuff, she's doing horticulture stuff, she's doing corn stuff. It's all there in Hamilton County. I'm doing turf stuff for the state. You're doing commercial horticulture for the state, right? And we have several other specialists in the department, a few others that work with this UT Hort effort in various capacities. So, I want to highlight a few specific things on the UT Hort side because it's pretty dynamic. And you're right, we haven't talked about volunteers yet, so that's definitely going to be on the list. But Let's start by talking a little bit about Anna and what Anna does, because there's some relevance for this audience, certainly.
Yeah. Yeah, so absolutely in that, kind of in that space of how do we continue to provide high quality content that is accessible and really actionable, rubber to the road for your jobs and your roles and your people, but also provide it in a way that, fits with your business or fits with your life. About Wow, now close to 5 years ago, we really made the decision to start to be very intentional about our digital offerings. And so we have two professional certification programs that are all online, self-paced, and of course, if you've been operating in this space for several years, you might think to 10 years ago and you're like, oh no, like y'all just recorded hour-long PowerPoints, didn't you? And we did, and we didn't, right? So Anna Duncan was in a county agent role, being one of these commercial consumer, volunteers, 4-H and all those sorts of things. But through her graduate work, she has a background in curriculum. And so we brought her on, and actually the lawn care professional was the first one that came online. And so, yes, there are videos, but they're in short segments. Most of them are shot outside with graduate students, with faculty, with extension specialists, many of our agents across the state. And so we've really received good feedback from that, from professionals. We use it as internal training for many of our new or moving around our extension system folks. And then a couple years after the lawn care certification came online, then we have a landscape professional, which is, of course, the kind of moving from the turf area into the, woody and perennial area. So it includes many of those same sorts of, professional practices. But the other thing that we build into that is a connectivity to the county office. So there is information in each one of those trainings about what extension is, how you can get connected, because Anna's not on here, so I don't have the exact number. She would, but it's high. It's like 80+% of the folks that take those certification programs haven't interacted with their county office. So we're being able to actually use that as an additional door to connect people to the great human resources that are in extension.
Yes. Okay. So let's talk about a few other resources. I'm actually going to pull this up here for us to look at together. So UT Hort has prioritized several new publications over the past few years that I've been here. I thought we could kind of look at this. If I go to the UT Hort website here, there have been several new publications that have focused on annuals and perennials. And Natalie, maybe we can talk about this one a little bit.
Yes. So I'm sure that if you interact directly with lawn care customers, you've not had anybody ever say, "Is there something I could put here that would not, require maintenance, or what could be other options?" And so this is our multi-year effort to both provide information about options, but within the context of reality, right?
So you guys have followed a pretty similar structure for a lot of these publications. So there's really great tables in here that really synthesize information. You'll find a lot of key details. So this is just an example of the one of the newest publications from UT Hort, which is focused on ground covers. And so you've got all kinds of things, including indicators around light tolerance or shade tolerance, whether or not they're an evergreen, when their bloom time is, examples of cultivars and trade names, a little bit of a description. You want to tell them about your TriStar, which I love.
Yes, yes, our TriStar is the indicator that this is a plant that is native to Tennessee. So it's really the Tennessee region. Now, there are many plants that are native to the Southeast that would be great in the landscape, but just for the sake of clarity, we have chosen Tennessee as this TriStar representation because we want to communicate that clearly. but we want to cite those native plants within the broad functionality of selection. We don't just want to, I mean, this is intentional, right? So we don't have native plant lists. We have plant lists that denote what is native because we want to provide the information that helps people select what actually fills their need, and then native being a potential subheading of that. So this is true for our, for our trees and upcoming shrubs. We just got done with a, woodland shade publication. So all of those are options, and some of the older publications we're going to integrate that in as we rehash those.
Yeah. And here's my little new turfgrass one. And for those of you that maybe have or have not seen it, we do have a turfgrass selection publication for Tennessee landscapes. It's really catered more to that consumer audience to help guide selection decisions. It's one of the biggest questions that we get in a state where you can grow both warm and cool season grasses, and neither one is going to be perfect, and you're going to have trade-offs. We wanted to have a resource for that. So that is on the UT Hort website as well. And I guess we should mention that, Extension as an entity is working on a new extension publication website. It's not quite ready yet, but we got a preview of it at a Master Gardener conference recently. I was pretty excited about it. I found it much more user friendly, maybe than what has been there since I
Yeah,
started.
yeah.
So.
It is, of course, the common and viable criticism of public institutions that we're much better at creating information than we are at actually making it easy to find. So that is our intent with the UT Hort website, that you don't get lost in, many, many web portals that you never know where you are. We try to make those tiles as simple as possible. Some of them have some videos and things like that that are connected with them. So yeah, so that's kind of the baseline of the resources that we have, and hopefully, we continue to connect with the broader audience. Some of the fun things that we've done with some of those selection publications is had producer reviewers and grower reviewers and things like that. So we always have room to improve the simplicity and straightforward and readability of those, but we're working with y'all to keep us from making things too annoyingly complex.
Okay, so now we haven't even opened this door yet, but tell us about this whole other part of your job, which is that you manage the statewide Master Gardener program.
Yeah, yeah. So in the area of ways that we can expand our capacity, then, it very much makes sense if we have counties that literally have hundreds of thousands, or, a few now that we're in the millions of folks that are interested in horticulture and great information. And, we should recruit some folks to help us with that. So here in the state of Tennessee, we have over 3,000 of our Master Gardener volunteers that are led by their county agent in county groups, but we train them with the same content. They operate off of this baseline of materials. And what we have really, focused on over the last few years is this consistent culture of, I want to provide information, but I'm not trying to, preach or convince. We want for our volunteers to be, giving that same, clear and convincing, but not coercive source of information to the folks that they interact with, because many times, your customers that you deal with, in their lawns may have a neighbor that is a volunteer. And what we found, I have some really interesting survey data that tells us exactly this, right? Is that that broad group of, consumers, the 98% that we deal with, they may no longer know who Extension is. They may not come to us, but you know who they ask? They ask their friends and neighbors. And so the way that I would, simply describe our Master Gardener program is we are doing our best to train people's friends or neighbors with high quality information. So when they ask them, in the garden center or across the back fence, there's a greater chance that the person that they're talking to may have some high quality information to give.
Okay, so you know where I'm going next with this, which is that we are piloting kind of a
Yeah,
new
yeah. I mean,
thing
what
with
what better way to equip that friend or neighbor with high quality research based information than to actually engage them in the research? Is that what you were gonna say?
Yeah, 100%. What a perfect segue.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Bumgarner and I are we're trying something new. We are working to get master gardeners involved in some applied research, where they get to become familiar with the research process and what that looks like. They get to host trials in their county that help us to gather more information. A lot of for everybody listening here, that's our turfgrass nerds. A lot of our turfgrass research in Tennessee is done in Knoxville. Well, we got a whole lot of state out there that may or may not climatically, soils wise, be in alignment with Knoxville. So this would potentially give us an opportunity to collect some new data on how different grasses perform. And in Natalie's case, what are some of the things that you guys are looking at on the horticulture side there?
Yeah, yeah. So my well, a lot of my experience in working with volunteers or citizens in applied research is vegetable trials. And so we send out seed, we gather data. We're actually on our 10th year of that. And so it really creates not only a data set that we would not be able to get in any other methodology, but it also communicates better, right, than hours and hours of speeches and lectures about why it is that these real life data sets are important, right? Because this site is different than this site, and, climate variability and, urban to rural spaces and soil and all of that is different. And when people experience that for themselves, it makes what we do valuable and real in a way that, like, we could, endless words would not be able to convince them. And it makes what we do with applied research more real and valuable. It makes what you do as managers and professionals more valuable because it turns out that growing food, right, or growing high quality landscapes and turf grasses is like really harder than what the 90-second video that they watched might indicate.
Yes. Yes, and I think, for me, just getting people, I still deal with a lot of folks that they don't know any tall fescue variety other than Kentucky 31. And Kentucky 31 has its place, right? We're not shaming Kentucky 31, but it was discovered in a pasture in 1931. So it's about a century old, and we've come a long way. So giving people an opportunity to really work directly with some of these new varieties, giving them some autonomy, giving them an opportunity to have a different relationship with turf grass, in my case. We're excited about that, and we've been piloting some efforts. Actually, I'll go tomorrow to see our good friend Greg Upchurch, who's listening, to take some data. We've been piloting the turf grass version of this in Cumberland County. You've got some things going in Cumberland County as well with some tomatoes and
Yeah.
peppers and stuff. So we're getting a feel for what this will look like when we try to launch it on a larger scale next year.
Yeah. Yeah, we're really excited about the opportunities for this type of work as our cities, our counties, our communities grow. We have more and more need for information about selection, about management, and what better way than to deputize great knowledgeable people. And what Greg would say if we would, let him talk on this webinar is nobody around the country is really doing this in a way that truly harnesses the amazing potential that we have, and we're excited to give it a shot and really spread this applied research opportunity to the great folks we have around the state that we're already working with in educational roles.
Yeah. Okay, so I feel like this is a great segue to transition from volunteer research to your research. So, I guess, obviously as extension specialists, we have extension responsibilities. But in today's era, all faculty are expected to tick every box. So we are expected to also do some teaching, also do some research, also write some grants, also write some papers. So why don't you tell our audience a little bit about your research program and what that looks like and some of the cool things you're working on?
Yeah. Yeah. So, the applied research areas that I work in, I guess I kind of referenced, some of the, consumer, perception types of areas. So that is more kind of where horticulture meets sociology. So we do a lot of work in that area. Of course, I'm a plant person, right? So, I come from a production background, greenhouse, high tunnel, field, fruits and vegetables. So I do a lot of variety and management trials in annual vegetables as well as small fruits. I'm in Middle Tennessee today because we are picking blackberry and blueberry data on one of our research stations in Middle Tennessee. So that is data that is designed to serve the, non-commercial grower. From a fruit side, because we have many diversified farms in that small fruit area, what works really well for me to communicate to a gardener that has a dozen, plants in their backyard is also very similar to what might suit an early stage commercial grower that's, doing a U-pick or that has a farm stand. So some of that has some commercial consumer overlap. But another fun area, which I think maybe is where Becky was hoping that we'd go, is I also do cut flower research. So it's not as kind of out there as you might think because the local cut flower market is actually, from a production perspective, really similar to the way that you might grow vegetables, right? So it's typically in soil, it's outdoors, it's, we have some spring and fall. We definitely have some season edges, but oftentimes it takes place in that same, summer season. And it's a really big growing area of horticulture right now. Or I should say
So
maybe growing more than big. Yeah.
How did that come to be? How did you guys kind of get into that space? And I know that as a result of y'all's work in that space, and maybe it's a good time to also kind of talk about Celeste a little bit and her role. What are some things that have come out of that? I believe there's been some things that have come out of that
Yeah.
professionally for that
Yeah.
industry.
So the whole cut flower project really came about because um, as I'm sure over the past 20 years, the local food movement has been increasing. I kind of have a background in that, so I have some familiarity with the way that that has grown. But in the 2016, 2018, right? 2020, as we moved into those late teens, we really started to see some of those dynamics increasing in the area of local cut flowers, right? Because these were being marketed at farmers markets in a similar way that local vegetables would be. And so, according to like the US, DA data between, 2017 and 2022, when they took those numbers, the number of cut flower farms in the state of Tennessee increased by more than 100%. So it is by percentage rapidly growing. We now have nearly 200 growers, and while it's still a small segment of horticulture, we went from nearly $500,000 to over $1.5 million. So it's growing, and a lot of small producers, maybe partial income supplying people are getting into it, and we didn't have any research-based data to be able to provide for these folks. No budgets, no ability to really help them with fertilizer or even numbers that related to cultivar selection and things like that. So some of our, regional colleagues came to me and said, we're getting a lot of questions about horticulture and very straightforward, how should I control weeds? What's the spacing? What's the fertility recommendations? Y'all should do something about this. Like, find the answers to some of these questions. So, this is our third year of a specialty crop block grant, which has We Plant Geeks, right? So, this is federal funds that comes through our state Department of Agriculture, which supports a lot of these um, like close to implementation types of research projects. We're not doing basic research on bench science. We're creating information that can go right to consumers. So we have cultivar trials, we have fertility trials, and our econ colleagues have taken all of those counts and materials and data that we collect and created baseline budgets for growers. So I do the Knoxville based trials. Later this week, we'll have our first harvest for this year's, fertility and cultivar trials. But my colleague Celeste Scott, who, is the queen of horticulture in West Tennessee, does the trials in Jackson. So, to the best of our ability, we synchronize those trials, and it's really been interesting the differences that we see from one side of the state to the other in plant size and timing and yield and soil dynamics and pest and disease pressure and all of those types of things.
I like it. I've been very spoiled with Natalie doing this work because I will just come to my office often and have just beautiful cut flowers on my desk. So I just kind of hope she never stops working in this space because it's pretty pleasant, very nice aesthetic in my office as a result. Um, so Natalie, kind of another area that you work in often in collaboration with some of our colleagues in ALEC and ARAC is this area of consumer preferences, I would call it. I think that this is an audience that would be interested in some of that, getting back to some of what we talked about at the beginning of today. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah. So we talked a little bit about this in kind of in that native plant area. And there is, strong and emerging science in this area of what do consumers really perceive about our products? How do they make decisions? And how do we provide educational resources that can equip them to make better decisions? And yes, it is about buying products, but it's also about understanding the industry and the products enough to value them and to value you and what you do. So I'll give you a couple different examples. One of them relates to cut flowers. So we're growing flowers, right? And we're taking data and we're figuring out, what our production capacity is. But our goal with these projects is also to grow the market in a way that increases, right? Bigger pie. And yeah, we want for cut flower growers to sell those direct to consumers at farmers markets, but many of our farmers markets already have their central cut flower growers. So we're getting close to saturation in some of those direct market areas. So what would be the next opportunity? Well, to really get that product into florists, right? And to get into florists, then we have to have quality standards. We have to, come at that from a production perspective, but we have to really be able to produce something that looks good in a bouquet and is familiar to folks. So, we have actually done consumer surveys that ask people, what flower is this, right? So like a lot of people think that a dahlia looks quite a bit like a mum, right? Or a zinnia looks like a marigold. So we're looking at, what are like species substitutions opportunity for a local grower to be able to get those into, the traditional hands of a florist to really be able to grow the market. And of
It's
course, we're asking them, how much would you pay? Is local more valuable to you? Because we want them to understand the product enough to really be able to pay the grower what they need to keep the doors open.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. And I recognize you guys may not be doing this with this particular project, but I just always like to share because I don't think people know this even exists. But we have some colleagues, Alicia Reen here. She has some really cool technology where she can actually track eye movement. And so for certain studies, we're able to put images in front of somebody or put, and track what their eye is naturally drawn to. And sometimes you get more out of that even than you would from asking questions. It's just really interesting. There's a lot of work in this space to try to improve our understanding of what do people like, what are they drawn to. I think if I try to equate this to some things in turfgrass, areas of interest and things that we're interested in is what is your threshold for tolerance in terms of what is an acceptable level of pest pressure or weed pressure? How does that vary across different systems? My tolerance for weed pressure in a lawn setting is going to be very different than it may be in a putting green setting. And we understand this anecdotally, but may not always have really great data to support that and help drive decision making. Um, and so I think it's an interesting space. Um, and it kind of gets back to what we were talking about earlier. I think we have to understand these things and what people seem to be interested in, drawn to, et cetera, to help us as educators, and help us do impactful work.
Yeah. And to value the product, but to also value the people that created that product. And this, another project that I'm working in, it's very early stages. So like, I don't have a lot of data to throw at it, which I know everybody's terribly disappointed about, but, is in the nursery production area. And it's kind of around that topic of labor and the humans that were a part of that process. So we're beginning to do research on really asking questions of consumers, right? When they buy a tree or when they buy a shrub, do they have any idea how long it took to grow that? How many hands touched it? What about the human part of that process, right? That person's work satisfaction, that person's, mental well-being. Like, how can we help the consumer understand the production process in a way that they, in their purchasing decisions, how much and what they buy, is able to contribute to supporting, the livelihood and the health and well-being of that person that was a part of that. And I hope that kind of makes, sense, or you can kind of connect with that. The What we're basing that on is, think of fair trade coffee, right? We've
Yeah.
begun to train the consumer on some of those types of attributes as it relates to products, right? Food products plant products they ingest. Well, we want to, begin to investigate what that looks like for products that they may not eat, but they see, they buy, they utilize, they get the value from. We want them to also value the people that were connected with that process.
I think that any of our turfgrass managers on here are going to resonate with this completely because,
Yeah.
when I tell people what I do, and I'm sure this is true of anybody that works in turf, one of the first questions I usually get is, that's a thing? Nobody has ever thought about that there's anybody actually managing these sites, right? It's just they just think it magically happens, or they take for granted. They're like, well, I mow my lawn, so this must be the equivalent of that, right? And so there's definitely a fundamental disconnect in the amount of work and thought and intention that goes into these sites that I think a lot of folks would love for somebody to better understand what is going into that and what that contribution looks like. And we're in just such a weird time too, where we're seeing increased adoption of autonomous mowers, autonomous painters, and it's kind of shifting around what parts of management are automated, which parts are still done by people, what that relationship looks like. And I would say, like, we're entering this world before we ever really got to a point that people understood the people part of it very
Yes.
well. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. 100%. And that's exactly what we're looking at kind of from the nursery side, in that the project, right, is actually investigating where the points of automation are of highest utility, just exactly as you were talking about with, say, autonomous mowers. But that doesn't remove humans. It actually makes the people even more important, right? Because they're at critical junctures. We're not necessarily even really reducing employment. We're just increasing the empowerment, right, of the people that remain in that system, because they are now operating at a higher knowledge, or equipment level. So anyway, yeah, it's
yeah.
exactly analogous.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, we're entering this world where we have a lot of new tools. I think that they still require oversight and curation by human experts. We're not in a place that we
Yeah.
can just fully automate everything that we do. Anybody that's worked with autonomous mowers knows that you got to watch them. they require some they
Yeah.
require some
Yeah.
oversight. So you're right. And I think it's going to be really important for us to be able to, as this changes so quickly, to be very clear to a public who again does not understand about the importance of that human role, about what that dynamic looks like. I think we've got to figure out what our messaging is around that so that people don't take for granted that everything can just be done by machines and robots and there's no human element, you know? And so, okay, I just looked at the time here. I want to make sure that I share this real quick. So, again, when you register today, you provided Dr. Brosnan everything that he needs to sit down and get all of your points submitted for pesticide points. However, if you are here for GCSAA, education points, this is the information that you need here. So I'm sharing that. Pesticide points, you're already covered. This is just if you are looking for education points for the Golf Course Superintendents Association of America. Okay. So, Natalie, I always like to try to have some kind of closing question here. So, I guess, my question for you would be, if you wanted this audience to know one thing about consumer horticulture as they leave today, what would be that thing?
Um, I think that that my closing pitch would probably be that your consumer is my consumer, and that when we're educating them from multiple directions with synergistic and, aligned content and information, then then everybody wins. And so I just think it's exciting that, say a consumer horticulture specialist has the opportunity to collaborate with, right, the huge, services sector, because all of our environmental and economic, outcomes, we all benefit when when our consumers learn more. So I think it's awesome to, have the opportunity to really continue to get on the same page.
I agree. And I guess I would just, add to that that if you are a professional working here in the state of Tennessee and you do not yet have a relationship with your county extension agent, I would really encourage you to reach out. We have really exceptional agents. They've got really good relationships with our specialists. We've got a great network and extension to help support a lot of variable needs, and so, I would say I got a lot of golf course superintendents who are exceptional when it comes to turf grass, but when it comes to trees or when it comes to ponds or when it comes to landscape questions or when it comes to wildlife questions, they hit a wall and they're looking for where do I go from here? And so that's where what we're here for in extension is to
Yeah.
help you get connected to the experts in those spaces. So
Yeah.
please take advantage of that.
And know that our whole goal as a team at the county and at the state level is to take those questions, and if we have great resources, it's fast. If we don't, we put that in the pipeline, and so much of the good information that we're excited to provide now, half a dozen years ago, was just a question that we didn't have the answer to. And, our stakeholders or our county collaborators came to us and said, "Hey, y'all need to work on this. Get going."
All right. Well, Natalie, thank you for your time today. I think we're at time, so I'm going to stop recording here. And we look forward to seeing everybody back here in August.